Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome back to the TCEC tournament that's going on now these days. So far, Lc0 is playing really great chess. Lc0 is in the lead, has half of the point more than Stockfish 13, but also more than this very strong Dragon engine. And as usual, we're following simply the leader. That's simply like that on my channel. I hope you don't mind, because recently Lc0 played really outstanding chess with great positional understandings of particular positions. And in this game that I wanted to show you today, it was a game played by Lila against Rubi chess. Rubi chess is also a very strong engine. Its rating is 3,426. On the other hand, Lc0's rating is 3,586. So it's of course a huge rating difference, but the positional understanding, I think, of Lc0 is much better. Here in this particular game, Lc0 will destroy this Sveshnikov, Pelikan, Lasker, Sicilian setups. We have seen also recently by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. He plays also very often similar, not the same, but similar lines, and I think you can use this very cool game played by Lc0 in order to have a great positional understanding of this particular opening, and also of this sidelines, potential sidelines of this very aggressive opening of black. So let's check out now the game. Here Lc0 played the move e4, c5, knight to f3, still prearranged, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight to d4, knight to c6, and now after the move knight to c3, we have now the move e5. And this move e5 is similar, as I said, in the Lasker, Pelikan, Sveshnikov, Sicilian setup, but usually we're still playing the move knight to f6 before, and then we're trying the move e5. In the game, Lc0 tries knight to b5, which is the most accurate line to proceed here. After a6, knight to a3, we have now b5, threatening here the fork, and here after the move knight to d5, here knight to e7 was played by Rubi chess. This was the last prearranged move, and now let's see how Lc0 proceeded in this particular position. Lila played bishop to d3, and it's actually one of the best ways here, because it seems so that maybe black could take knight takes d5, but then the game becomes really complicated, although it's a very often played line by black. Here after e takes d5, knight to e7, we could go immediately here c4. The problem is now you cannot actually take. Knight to c4 will happen, then we have some weaknesses here around the square d6. Taking out then afterwards the pawn on d5 is never possible, because you get simply bishop to e4, so you get an attack here. If the knight, for instance, takes out the pawn on d5, then the knight gets pinned and you will lose probably the rook or maybe the whole knight. So that's why taking out here is not an option. But even after g6, which would be the most often played line by black, I think we can immediately take, and it leads now into a complicated game for black. It's basically a gambit line sort of for black here, and I think white has a decent position here. White can simply continue the attack, has here 3 versus 1 situation. If you take, of course, would simply bring our bishop very active into the game, then we can castle, and I think it's much better for white. So after the move bishop to d3, taking out the knight in the center is maybe possible, but it's probably not so good, because here in the game Rubi chess tried move knight to d4, tried also to cement one of these knights on this very active squares, castling rook to b8, and now rook to e1 by Lc0. This is a very important move. It seems so that nothing special is going on, but now actually after potential knight to d5, you see, and e takes d5, if this knight moves to f5, still we have opportunities then to break and open the position with the move f4. The rook is now on the same file like the king, and that's why we could use this moment and play f4 immediately. So that's why this rook to e1, very cool move, very nice attacking move, indirectly basically attacking the king, so the knight can stay a little bit longer here on this very active square. In the game, bishop to d7, and now c3. So of course, a natural idea, we want to kick away this very annoying knight. Knight to e6, and now bishop to f1. Again, if you try knight to d5, again e takes d5, maybe you could cement the knight on c5, but f4, I'm pointing out, is very dangerous already here for black. You're even forced maybe to play some bad lines like the move f6, and we could maybe even attack for simply the knight b4, then c4, c5. This would be a great opportunity, I think, for black, for white, pardon me, then maybe to break the position around the square c5. That's actually the main goal of whites, somehow to break through with c4 and then follow with c5. So I think it's much better position. You see, you have several light problems here in front of the king. This bishop is bad on f8. It's blocked out by its own pawn structure, basically. this g7 and f6 setup is blocking out the dark square bishop, or dark square bishop from white perspective is perfectly fine. It can be maneuvered to e3, then it can attack of course the knight on c5, so it's a pleasant game I think for white. So after the move bishop to f1, we have queen to c8, and now Lila c0 plays bishop to e3. This wasn't the best suggested line by my Stockfish engine at home. The Stockfish engine suggests simply here the move b4 followed with c4, then after knight to c4 attacking further the d6 pawn, because so far you couldn't take, and that's the main issue I think. It's of course maybe a better continuation for white, but bishop to e3 is also a very cool move by Lila c0, because we're threatening basically the move knight to b6, and there's nothing that you can do so much I think in order to prevent this idea knight to b6. In the game the Rubi chess tried knight to c5 to lock simply here the long diagonal for the dark square bishop, but Lila c0 plays now an outstanding tactic, b4, and b4 it's really complicated now for black. Basically it's already a bad game. Knight to e4, it was a pawn sacrifice, but here was of course Lila c0's idea, knight to b6, the fork against the bishop and the bishop and the queen. If you try something like queen to c6, you have to always take care of, because you cannot take rook takes b6 followed with bishop takes b6 and then queen to b6. This would be of course very cool if you manage to do that. You get 2 pieces for the rook, but actually your knight is hanging also here indirectly. If we move the bishop, of course would then also take out the knight. The queen gets deflected from the defense of the knight, so you lose rook and the piece for 2 pieces, so then it's of course completely losing. You could try maybe here after potential c4 by white, you could maybe try the move f5 in order to break the position, but now c takes b5 wins the game immediately. After a takes b5, bishop to b5, you see it's something that black should immediately resign. So really wild stuff. So you see this Sveshnikov, Lasker, Pelikan, Sicilian setups, Lila c0 really outplayed in an early stage of the game. We're now in move 16, and basically it's a bad game already for black here. In the game Rubi chess tried rook takes b6. It was a desperate try. Bishop takes b6. We have knight to c3. Okay, Rubi chess calculated this tactic in order to grab further the pawn, but now Lila c0 can also take out this pawn on d6, and now after knight to g6, Lila c0 simply retreats and attacks the knight. We have bishop to b4, so you see Rubi chess took another pawn, but now after knight to c2, Lila c0 managed to slow down a little bit black's pace here. Black has of course a great activity with the minor pieces, but now after knight to c2, basically Lila c0 solves all of the positional problems. In the game here bishop to c5 was played. If you retreat maybe somewhere with the bishop, it's not so good. We can play bishop to a5, and I think this is a much better position. The knight is really weird here. You have to play some weird moves like knight to a4, and still we can play bishop to b4 followed bishop takes b4, then the knight would come very active into the game. Still you see this e5 is a long-term weakness, so we can also try some a4 in long terms, of course, to break here the pawn chain, try to create some weaknesses here. So it's simply a pleasant game for white. So after the move knight to c2, in the game bishop to c5, bishop takes, queen takes c5, a3. Very nice positional move, because what black would love to do, of course, in this position is to cement somehow this knight with b4 and then a5. Then the knight would be very annoying. You couldn't actually kick away the knight. You would need at least many tempi in order to somehow attack the knight on c3. This would be then a positional mistake if you would allow your opponent to play the move b4. That's why a3, very nice positional move, as I said, by Lila c0. King to e7. Rubi chess plays really here a weird move, king to e7, but it's actually not so bad, because you see now after knight to b4, rook to c8, Rubi chess found a great way how to activate the rook to e3 by Lila c0, and now bishop to e6, knight takes a6, queen to d6, and now rook to d3. Very nice idea by Lila c0, because you could also probably trade off the queens, king to d6, but the game becomes, I think, more and more complicated, because the queens are off the board, no more tactics are possible. And what black could maybe use, of course, white is much better in this in the top engine level. White is winning this game for sure, but black could actually try something like f5, f4, e4, and similar ideas. This knight is still very annoying. We can then try knight to d5, attacking for the rook. So maybe black could have some opportunities to attack the king side with this 4 versus 3 pawn majority. So that's why I liked really Lila-C0's choice to go now tactically into the game. We're staying with the queens on the board. Rook to d3. We have queen to c6 in the game. If you take, for instance, this knight would simply also take the knight on c3, so nothing dramatically has changed. We're staying with the queens on the board. Even if you try bishop to c4, I think we can even take bishop takes c4, b takes c4, and now building simply a rook battery on the c file. And I think in a couple of moves this pawn will be taken for sure. So it's not so easy, I think, to defend this pawn. So that's why whatever black does, it doesn't bring so much, I think, here in this position. So rook to d3, as I said, knight to queen to c6, knight to b4, attacking the queen, queen to c5, and now queen to e1. We have f5. You see Rubi chess is trying still this pawn majority attack. We have rook to d2. We have king to f6. Rubi chess hides here with the king on a very, very weird square, but actually it's not so easy for Lila-C0 to attack the king. The heavy artillery, the rooks are simply coordinated to the queen side. You cannot include them immediately in the attack. You have to be patient here. You have to activate first your pieces, and still this knight is very, very annoying. The problem is always you cannot do some things like rook to c1 in order to pin the knight. Then you risk maybe some ideas of knight to e2, discover the attack, and then you lose the rook on the c file. So that's actually not a possibility. That's the main, I think, positional problem here for white. So that's why here rook to d2. Now this idea of knight to e2 doesn't work because still this knight is covering the c2 rook. So that's why Rubi chess right here, bishop to b3 to kick away this rook from this active file, h3, played by Lila-C0. What Lila is trying to is to get out of this tactical mess, out of this potential knight to e2 move. So here in the game, queen to d4, we have rook to c2, bishop to b3. Again, Rubi chess tries this perpetuals, tries to go at least and grab a draw somehow. After rook to d2, we have rook to b2, again king to h2. Now finally this tactic couldn't work. Now this discovered attack is not working against the king. So finally Lila-C0 can maybe double up the rook. Then here Lila-C0 played an outstanding move, rook to d6. Again, Lila didn't want to trade off the queens immediately. First Lila waited, bishop to e6, and now queen to e4, because now the attack, I think, of blacks is a little bit splashed. The pieces are not so active anymore in the game. Here f takes e4 was played. You see Rubi chess lost here a little bit the pawn storm, the king side pawn storm with this move f takes e4. But even if you take knight takes e4, if you're trying to stay with this healthy pawn structure, it's not so good because you get simply rook to b6. You see how Lila-C0 found great ways to activate this rook. Now this pawn is hanging. You could maybe try knight to c3, but we can simply take knight takes bishop, knight takes b5, bishop takes b5 here, rook to b5. It's simply a winning game again. We have now this pass pawn supported by these two rooks. So you see we didn't touch anything on the king side. Lila-C0 didn't even try to attack the position on the king side. Lila-C0 simply would here have a pass pawn with the support, as I said, with this rooks, with this knight. It's simply a lost game for black. After queen to e4, we have f takes e4. Now rook to c3, rook to c1, attacking the knight on c3. You see the importance of this move, king to h2, because again this tactic doesn't work. Here we have knight to e7, rook to b6 anyway, attacking simply this pawn on b5. We have rook to c7, and now h4. We have h6, and now h5. Lila-C0 grabs some space, but Lila is also patient. Now, of course, this idea bishop takes b5 doesn't work, because then you get knight takes b5, and then rook takes c7 followed with knight to c7. So it's simply not working. You lose too much material. Then black is probably better. So that's why here rook to c5, g3. We have king to f7, bishop to h3, trying to release the pressure, of course, simplify the position by the trades of bishops. Bishop to c8. Now Lila-C0 plays an outstanding pin move. Here, knight to a2. We have knight to d5. Now rook to b8. Bishop takes h3, king to h3, and now simply trading off more pieces. And this is, of course, a completely winning endgame. Here rook to b6, king to e8, and now very, very nice king movement here by Lila-C0. What you, of course, should never allow again are this some discovered attacks by the knight. The only way to lose this position, if you get with the king somewhere where the knight could check you, and then you lose, of course, the rook on the c file. So that's why here Lila C0 plays with the king, where none of these checks are possible. King to f5, we have rook to c4 check here, king to g8, and now Lila C0 moves even the king here towards the 6th rank. Really great play by the king here. Rook to c5, we have rook to b6, king to h7, and now rook to c2, e3, f takes c3, nothing dramatically has changed. G4, you see it was a Zugzwang position here by Lila C0. Knight, rook takes b5, here we have a check, but it's not the problem. King to e5, we have here rook to c8, and now rook to b6. A couple of checks were played, but no problem. Here we have this pass pawn. Lila C0 simply pushed the pawn further. e4, rook to g5, rook takes g5. Of course, after this move, it's really game over. H takes g5, and now simply pushing the pawn further. We have rook to b1. Of course, we can catch up with this pawn. a6, knight to c3. Here e6, a7. Knight to f4. Now we're moving simply this pawn, a promotion here after g6, queen takes g2, and in this game Rubi just resigned. So it's of course a forced checkmate, whatever you do, king to h8, and then we'll simply play queen to a8 followed with rook to g6 and similar ideas. So it's simply lost game. As I said, outstanding game, I think, by Lila C0 against this annoying setups, we have to say it like this. You see Magnus Carlsen, as I said, is playing similar ideas, not the same, but let's go back to this opening line after b5, knight to d5, and now very interesting, this idea bishop to d3. So if you're facing these types of structures, these types of ideas of black, bishop to d3 is probably the best continuation, then followed with some c3 ideas. If the knight goes here to d4, c3 can be kicked away. I simply don't like this opening of blacks. It simply leaves too much weaknesses. This d6 is a long-term weakness. The d5 square is also a long-term weakness. We saw also the problems around the square b6 with bishop to e3, which was also very cool idea. So these squares and these pawns you can use here from white's perspective in order to attack the position. And Lila C0, as I said, brutalized really this opening. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more positional brilliances and attacking brilliances played by engines, check out my best chess games of all times played by computers. Here's the link. And if you want to see humans battling it out in their best chess games, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.